Join me in welcoming John Baker.
I'm going to tell how the book came to be. It's been 25 years since I had this couple in New York that bought some property on Cape Cod. It was a beautiful wooded site. It's on the water, looked westward toward the setting sun. It was a wonderful, wonderful site. And so I went up to see the property, and then we had a couple of sessions, and I was working through, and I finally got a real idea of what I think was going to work for everybody. And at one meeting, I felt I'd nailed it, and I came up with a partie that I felt encompassed all of the aspects of the program. A partie, spelled P-A-R-T-I, but pronounced partie. It's an architectural term. It could be anything from a rough, squiggly little diagram, bubble diagram on the back of an envelope or a napkin or anything, but so long as it encompasses the essence of all of the essence of the solution to an eventual architectural design. And here's an example of a partie. That's not the partie of the house, but I'll get to why we're looking at this. It was obvious that I was excited, and they responded to my enthusiasm. And the wife of the couple said, "Oh, well, what style is it?" And I said, "Well, not to worry about the style as such at this point. That'll evolve as we move the process along." Well, she didn't seem convinced, and really wanted to know what the style was going to be. Well, after pressing the point a few more times, I finally did a little doodle of a sort of generic house with a chimney and smoke coming out of the top. And before she could comment, I drew a little glass box, a sort of Miesian or Philip Johnson kind of thing on stilts, and with a flat roof and lots of glass. Well, she didn't want that either, and not on Cape Cod. But I made the point that an architect's partie was simply a graphic representation of the kernel of an idea that incorporated all the essential elements of the ultimate design. Think of it as the acorn that becomes the oak tree. And that's what that is. That's, in a minute, let's see. I assured her that the house was on Cape Cod, it would have shingles, it would nestle into the site and become part of the landscape. With that reassurance, she seemed satisfied, and I headed home. That evening I was watching a program on television. I'm always doodling with something, and that evening I kept developing their partie into one historical style after another. After 6 or 7 of these, I called Liddy, my wife, some of you know her, and I said, "This is great. If I can do a chateau-esque, I can do anything." And I did, over 60 different variations. So that was how it began. And I had already written one book that first came out in 1977 called How to Build a House with an Architect. And then later on, Lippincott was bought by Harper and Row, and they brought it out again in an expanded version. So I wasn't a complete neophyte, but I thought I'd take a generic plan and develop it in 15 or 20 styles and perhaps publish it myself. And I put a package together, and I thought to share it with a friend who'd been in publishing all his life. When he saw my display, he saw exactly what I had in mind, and after a few harumphs and a well, I waited with bated breath. Instead of a caustic comment, the well was followed by, "You're not going to publish this yourself. This is a very marketable concept." Well, soon after that, W.W. Norton thought it was a great idea as well, and a few months later, was the first edition of this book, and that was literally 25 years ago. And it's been very gratifying that it's been in print all these years. So about a year ago, I got a call from Norton asking if I'd be interested in expanding the book, a new preface to the new edition, and add a chapter saying what's new in the last 25 years. So of course I jumped at it. And to think that it was 25 years ago still amazes me. And some of you probably remember the radio personality Paul Harvey, who used to he used to say, "And now you know the rest of the story." And people have asked me over the years, what was my interest in architecture? How did I get started with it? Well, I was lucky. I was born with an ability to draw, but I was also blessed with a compulsion, not just to draw, but to make things. And as a youngster growing up in a very rural area, I must have set a record building huts, underground huts, tree huts, normal huts, and that was what we did. That was the most exciting thing to me as a kid. So this is a sketch I made of a street musician in Galway in 1999. This is another sketch that was, this is the area where I grew up. It was way out on the South Shore of Long Island at the end of the Great South Bay. And as I grew up, I was very aware of the architectural profession. It was in my genes. My father's brother, my uncle, William Edgar Baker Jr., was an architect in New York. One of my mother's brothers was an architect on Staten Island. He founded the chapter of the AIA on Staten Island. I had a great uncle, my grandfather, younger brother James Barnes Baker, practiced architecture in New York, and there are a couple of his buildings are city landmarks today. The Chamber of Commerce building down on Liberty Street and the United Charities building, there are two of them. And my kin who weren't architects were for the most part engineers or builders. And my grandmother Baker was an artist who painted in oils. So there was no question that it's in my genes, and that's where my interest lay. So these were the two slides showing that this ability to draw. Another very fortunate thing happened when I was in school. In my last year in high school, I had the great fortune to take an AP course in the history of Western architecture. It was taught by an artist. He was a landscape painter who had a background in history and architecture. And he covered the history of architecture from the classical Greek-Roman period through the early Christian and Byzantine, Romanesque, and the Gothic. That was all in the fall term. And we covered the Renaissance during the winter term. And the spring was devoted to American architecture, and he demonstrated how it had all been influenced historically by the earlier periods. And we had to draw all the classical orders and identify the major Gothic cathedrals. I still have my two loose leaf notebooks, and I treasure them. They were defining influence on my life, really. So then, let's go back to Partee. This is not the Partee of the house on Cape Cod, but I just took a sort of generic house, 2-story, living room, entrance, dining room, a garage, back hall, kitchen, sort of family room, and then upstairs I had 4 bedrooms, and I had them all separated by, for privacy, by closets or bathrooms or something. And then the next stage to go from that was to refine the Partee a little bit more. It gets a little less squiggly. And then that was the ground floor, and in the earlier edition of the book, this is the one that I track all the way through. This is the second floor, And there was a hall bath that's shared by these 2 bedrooms, a living room, a master bedroom, and they're all separated, and that seemed like a fun thing to do. So what style is it, going back to my client whose house I did on Cape Cod? And I thought, well, supposing we took this and did a early New England Colonial. And this is an illustration from my my book, which is originally, if those of you that knew the original book saw it only in black and white. So I've colored every plate in the book. And I was telling somebody the other day, if I had 6 or 8 more plates to do, I think my eyes would have turned Crayola sky blue. I mean, it was on and on. And there's sort of typical, this is a wonderful house. It was Saugus Iron Workers' house near Boston, and here's another one in Ipswich. But you could see this part of the original house didn't change. What did change was what I did here, and was able to develop into a early New England version, if you will, of the style. And I thought, well, let's see. It's a jump to go from early New England to federal, but here we are. This part stays the same, and I just developed it in, that's again the colored illustration from the original book, original plate, and here are 2 examples, both outside of Boston. This is what I was doing earlier on when I came back from and was watching whatever the TV program was. And, oh, well, let's do a Greek revival. Can we do that? And this, again, is the illustration from my book. And here, again, you see that this part of the plan stays exactly the same. In this case, I just added a porch, and it echoes typically, and you'll see examples in the book of other examples of the Greek revival. And then this is, again, totally different. This is an Italian villa, and this is a house in Ridgefield, and it's fun. I always envied people who were bird watchers, and you go along with them, and suddenly they get all excited, and you hear a tweet somewhere, and it's a rosy-breasted pushover or something like that. And so this is again the example from my book. And this is the Morse house. This is a very substantial masonry house in Portland, Maine. And this I discovered about a month ago. It's on a little side street in Sharon. And it's on the way down to the hospital somewhere. But it's the tower that's the giveaway. But you can see, again, this is all the same. And with the partie, I just monkeyed with that a little bit. And it was about the equivalent of this period that I said, if I can do a chateau-esque, I can do anything. So this is probably the most famous chateau-esque building in North America. It was built for George Washington Vanderbilt, and Richard Morris Hunt was the architect. So what did I do? Came up with this. And I went on from there, and of course I had a pretty good sense of an interest in historical periods of architecture. But I thought, if I'm going to publish this and I'm going to put it in a book, I really have a lot of homework to do, so that anything I drew, I wanted to be absolutely sure that it was accurate. And I feel confident that my interpretation of this same little that it was accurate. And I think so. Then, well, let's see what else we could do. Some of you may recognize this. It's up in Lime Rock. It's a wonderful building. It's Queen Anne, and that was the cover, actually, on my first edition of my book. And then these are samples of typical Queen Anne's. Some have the tower. They don't always have to have that. But again, you see it's exactly the same partie, the same floor plan. And then after that, my daughter lives down in Santa Fe, and I've always been fascinated by the Pueblo style. And to think that you can take this one simple, basic plan and develop it in all of these different styles is kind of fun. So that's the illustration from my book. I fattened up the walls because of the adobe. But these are two examples, one in Sedona and one in Santa Fe. And that has this cantilever. It's a very modern house, but it still has the character of the Pueblo. So that appealed to me. Some of you may recognize this. It's up in Lakeville. And again, it's the same basic plan, and that was the international style that I talk about in the book. So then, getting into the 12th chapter entitled What's New? So what has happened in our lives 25 years ago? Well, one thing that's happened is that a lot of people work at home. I have two sons. They're both partners, and one's a partner at Deloitte Consulting, an international consulting firm. The other's a partner in a law firm. And guess what? There's at least one day a week where they work at home. And so that room is a dedicated room. It's got all the gadgetry and the things that you need to stay in touch with the rest of the world. So the other thing is that there's fewer and fewer sort of formal dinner parties, and families are smaller. If you look at a lot of the plan books that were published in the 1890s, there were parlors, and the largest room, almost invariably, was the dining room. And that's sort of changed. So what I did here was to take what was the dining room, and I show it with a pull-out bed. Obviously, it could be a bedroom or a home office. And instead of just the little powder room, I turned that into a full bath. So that the dining is probably going to go on much more informally as a part of what I indicated was the family room off the kitchen. And, I'm sorry, down here. And then upstairs, the other house probably didn't have enough closets. People seem to have more and more clothes. My clients, the closets get bigger and bigger, but you take the master bath and the master dressing, it takes up a lot more room than the actual master bedroom itself. So I have figured out a way of getting more closets. The other thing is the sense of privacy, and so all suite bathrooms are sort of de rigueur these days. No matter how small they are, if you have a guest room or a kid's room, it's nice to have. So in this case, it's basically the same plan, but I made and I just put this bath right above the other one, and made that two similar ones with showers. And then just to close, these are four very, very different houses or versions of the same basic plan, postmodern, neo-colonial revival, Miesian, and the only term that wasn't an accepted standard term used among architectural writers and historians, I invented nouveau traditional for these people seem to call them McMansions, that kind of thing. So, and I want to end with just reading a couple of passages from my book. These were from the original book. I said, "It's my hope that houses built in the coming years will be simpler and less pretentious than ones we saw in the 80s. Houses should have more substance than style. Plans should be more thoroughly developed than the ones in most plan books or than most developers offer to the public. The character of houses should be less self-conscious and less intrusive than most architects produce today. Throughout our history, Our houses have derived elegance from simplicity, dignity from restraint, and richness from subtle diversity. There should always be a place in our communities for comfortable, livable houses that express the character of the region, the site, and the people who live in them. Let's not worry so much about what particular style our houses are. Let's trust they will simply have style, an inherent intrinsic style that derives from the nature of the materials used, an expression of the spaces defined. Above all, let's build houses that live comfortably with their surroundings, are courteous to their neighbors, and deferential to the environment. I believe our American houses can continue to provide the comfort and sense of well-being that they have in the past. The need to show off will be less important to a society that's increasingly comfortable with itself, and that one that is enriched by a knowledge of our history and a greater appreciation of our architectural heritage. And I will end this little talk with my closing remarks in the new edition of my book. I said, I hope the next generation of young adults will enjoy looking at architecture, particularly houses, with a new interest in the way we live and how the study of architecture can enrich our lives. If I can encourage my readers to view residential design with an informed and critical eye, I will have succeeded in my goal in writing this book. So endeth the reading of the lesson. Thank you.